All right, looks like we are live. So, hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nate Bailey, and I'm working in collaboration with FamilyKind, a nonprofit organization that empowers children, parents, and couples before, during, and after separation or divorce. We want to be respectful of everyone's time today, so we're going to jump right into our content. But before we start that, we are able to bring you this peer-to-peer webinar series for professionals free of charge because of the generosity of our two sponsors today, those being Our Family Wizard and SoberLink, as you can see on the screen here. Now, I'm a representative of Our Family Wizard, which is a comprehensive app that enables you to conduct all of your co-parenting communication on a single platform. Powerful tools document your parenting time, reimbursement requests, payments, exchanges, and more. This means less conflict and more energy to focus on your children. Now, SoberLink supports accountability for sobriety and child safety, combining a breathalyzer with facial recognition and wireless connectivity for real-time results and reports. SoberLink's new family assistance program offers alcohol monitoring free of charge to anyone who qualifies. By increasing their total reach in our mission of supporting families affected by alcohol abuse, this program will help continue to reduce litigation and foster peace of mind. Now, if we can go on to the next slide. Today's webinar is entitled From Pajamas and Slippers to Suits and Shoes, Post-COVID Trauma, Secondary Trauma, and Post-Traumatic Growth, How It Might Affect Me and My Work. And today we're gonna learn from two experienced professionals, Diane Hessman and Nancy Nyberg. Diane co-leads the FamilyKind Secondary Trauma Support Group. She is also a parenting coordinator, coach, Good Talk for Parents facilitator, and parent education skills educator for FamilyKind. Diane is a social worker with more than 30 years of experience working with families. She held administrative positions in both foster care and domestic violence systems prior to becoming a City University of New York adjunct professor of human services. Diane also teaches online for the Fordham Graduate School of Social Services. She has been an active member of the Appellate Division 1st and 2nd Department's mental health panel since 1996, where she serves families who are struggling with divorce and separation issues, provides therapeutic supervised visitation services, home assessments, and parenting coordinating services. Diane has additional training from the Ackerman Institute in divorce mediation, as well as in the areas of domestic violence and addiction. Nancy Nyberg is also a co-leader of the FamilyKind Secondary Trauma Support Group. She is also a parenting education skills educator for FamilyKind and an active member of the FamilyKind Advisory Council. Nancy is a trainer, psychotherapist, and mediator who currently is working for the City of New York as a trainer with a training portfolio on such topics as relationship building with clients, communications, stress management, secondary traumas, trauma-informed care, elder abuse, and anxiety in the older person. Nancy is a volunteer mediation developer and manages the Parent ACT program in NYCID. She also teaches mindfulness to NYS teachers. Now, for a few housekeeping notes before I pass it over to them. Today, our program will run for 1 hour. Please feel free to utilize the Q&A function on Zoom for your questions throughout the event, although the chat will also be open for some interactivity throughout the program, so be mindful of that. The questions that you send may get answered throughout the presentation progresses. Otherwise, we will take some time at the end as well if we have it. But for now, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Diane and Nancy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nate. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Diane Hessman, and we just wanted to first share with you just some brief history. What happened is that right before the pandemic, in March of 2020, Nancy and I did an in-service training on secondary trauma, and we'll get into that more. And secondary trauma is an issue that needs attention regardless of a pandemic. And then coincidentally, as we know, then the pandemic happened. We had a plan that we were going to start an online group for professionals anyway, and we've certainly encompassed a lot of issues dealing with the pandemic. I'll turn over to Nancy and see how we can make the connections here today as we start to think about going back to work.
Yeah, that's why we, decided to do this particular presentation, because of the work that we have been doing in secondary trauma with a lot of the people that work with clients who may bring difficult histories to the work that you do with them. And so the connection was about, now we're in a pandemic. So now what did that mean? And with the pandemic, that did bring about a lot more talk around, psychological wellness and mental health. So that's why we wanted to begin with this. So just so that you know, we just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that we will be talking about the pandemic and its impacts, mostly focused on our work at home life. But for the pandemic, a lot of people, if not everybody, experience losses as well as gains. So we just want to give a heads up to please take care of yourself as we go through this presentation. So we really have some objectives that we're looking to do with you. It really comes down with just making sure that we're all on the same page around trauma and secondary trauma and what that all means. And then to take a little bit more of a look at what has life been for us at home. What were some of the pluses and what maybe were some of the minuses? And then to think about how might we bring what worked well into, our jobs as we transition back or start to transition back. We're also going to take some time to just experience a short little mindfulness exercise, which is along the lines of self-care, and then to talk about FamilyKind and what they're doing to be able to help in this area. So that's what we're looking to accomplish. So just to start off with, the pandemic and our well-being in general is really along a continuum. And if you look onto the left side, I'm, experiencing stress, experiencing distress, and then of course, maybe even experience, trauma, even as a part of the pandemic, or as a part of the work that we do. And so that can lead to some kind of impairment in terms of our competency in being able to do our work. But things aren't always so negative in terms of this well-being. Diane?
Okay, so to look at the right side of the continuum, that some of us have found that the slower lifestyle has really helped us to wrap our minds around our coping and our managing. And we're going to look more about in this presentation about how crisis can really be an opportunity, and perhaps we found more of a meaningful life, and how do we bridge that as we go back, how do we bridge that as we go back into our work lives?
Right, so we're going to first take a look at the left side of this continuum.
So what is primary trauma? So primary trauma defined is a specific event that overwhelms the central nervous system, altering the way we process and recall memories. It's the current imprint of the pain, horror, and fear living inside people. So there's also a physiological aspect to this. And so what we would say is, yes, we would, when Nancy and I started working on the secondary trauma issue, that would be, and we'll go into that, experiencing what the clients experience. But now we're all professionals and the clients at the same time going through primary trauma. So we might not even have time to process the same thing that the client is going through. And so, we talk about separating our professional and personal selves. So that might be difficult to do at this time, or more challenging. So what is secondary trauma? So people who are at risk for secondary trauma are professionals who work in high stress and trauma exposed fields. So that could be CPS workers, social workers, attorneys working in family court, divorce attorneys, mediators, therapists, healthcare professionals. And vicarious trauma is living out the trauma that the clients are going through. And we'll look at, pre-pandemic, there might have been stigma attached to that. And, if we're supposed to be the helper, how can we say that we need help? But the self-care is really a goal, particularly now.
Right. Another piece of secondary trauma is this idea of compassion fatigue. And actually, all of these traumas kind of bleed into each other. There's a lot of discussion in the field as to whether these are separate things or not. It just may be what the cause of them are, but it impacts our work life. And the way compassion fatigue has been defined is something where you just really don't seem to have time to breathe in between work that you're doing. So it's meeting after meeting after meeting with clients, and particularly those clients that may have been traumatized themselves or bring difficult work lives, difficult history to the work that you're doing with them. And usually compassion fatigue is experienced that I have really no more to give. I have no more compassion to give. I can't listen to you anymore. I'm really kind of done. And the last thing we brought in was this idea about burnout, although not necessarily a trauma per se, but burnout is experienced really in three different ways. One is this idea of emotional exhaustion. And maybe many of you have experienced that in the last year or even before. Then it may move into this idea of what's called depersonalization, where you no longer see your client as a three-dimensional human being. They're referred to as cases, as an example. And then the last piece of burnout, where you're going down that slippery slope, is this idea of like a decreased sense of accomplishment. So you don't think that you're making impact. You don't think that you're making a difference. So those are some of the things that we are trying to address today.
So what are some symptoms of secondary trauma that we might not even notice in ourselves as we're just going and going from one matter to the next matter, one client to the next client? So it can be intrusive thoughts and images related to the client's disclosures and maybe their own horror and our own avoidant responses, physiological arousal. So there's actually changes that happen in the central nervous system as you're doing this fight or flight with your response to this vicarious or secondary trauma. Somatic complaints, distressing emotions, and sometimes we just need that quick fix so we could have addictive or compulsive behaviors. And they can include more than just, substance abuse or alcohol. There's, drinking and too much computer shopping, etc. And, those who work with victims of trauma are more at increased risks. And if we're not, one thing about the pandemic, so if we're not having this face-to-face contact with your peers, sometimes it might be a peer who points out to you that you might be, overloaded or suffering from secondary trauma. And just the last thing about this is that I think we've all had that case or that matter where the client has just very, very clear trauma or something out of the box that happened to them. And of course, we're going to be upset about that. But I think secondary trauma also, like, it could be erosive, that it's that day-to-day grind that you don't even realize after a while that you're being exposed to trauma almost every day in some form.
Right. And the last thing that we want to define in this area is this idea of distress, because that can happen right before feeling this experience of trauma. And we're defining it as a subjective emotional response and individual experiences in response to any of a number of challenges, demand, and stresses in one's life. So I'm sure everybody's experienced, stress. This is just a kind of moving along on the continuum, to distress. And one of the things that we want to talk about in terms of the continuum is that a lot of times you don't even know that you're moving in that direction because things just feel normal the way they are for you right now. And you actually are moving in a direction that may not be in your best interest. So, given all of that.
So just take a minute, and if you could think about what the stresses are or have been for you to work from home during the pandemic.
Looks like we have not yet gotten any contributions in the chat or the Q&A, but please feel free to utilize those sections.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so, and other questions could come up. You don't even have to just respond to the questions we have, anything we would, be happy to address. If not now, perhaps after the webinar. So, and that's how you make a peanut butter sandwich. So I think a lot of us could relate to at least some of this with regard to working from home, with the lack of boundaries. Okay, so some of the challenges in speaking with lawyers and mediators during the pandemic and working online could be, in particular, managing client expectations. One lawyer very eloquently, sadly, but eloquently, I had a conversation with last week. He's a litigator, and he said to me that while he might be able to do more filings in a more expeditious way, that he goes, it's really hard for him to argue a motion as effectively online as in the courtroom because of those nuances and the climate in the courtroom and being able to observe everyone. So he's finding that a challenge, and I'm sure he's not alone, that there's court delays due to technology on the part of the court and the litigants. There's last minute court demands online. And that, and for lawyers and mediators, that COVID compromised some existing parenting plans. We've had a lot of parents who are not in agreement with what the COVID regulation should be. And if people have, pods, how does that, affect somebody's access time with children? And also, lawyers and mediators can feel stymied in their ability to practice as effectively online.
Right, and also for our other mental health professionals, these are some things that we heard, about that stresses. I'm sure there are more things than just here, but just to bring to your awareness, this idea of the professional isolation. You may have rented some space, where other people are there that you would see, but now that you're working from home, you're more isolated. Privacy concerns, what's the configuration of your apartment, what family is in there, your clients, what was their access to technology and how were they able to use that technology, or maybe time boundaries for work that perhaps you felt for financial reasons you needed to take on clients. So you were seeing clients as early as 8 a.m. in the morning and then to 8 p.m. at night. Also, the fact that you weren't in person having contact in person, you missed out on a fuller observation of that person because you were only seeing them online, and optimum client engagement was compromised under those circumstances. So those are some of the the stresses and negatives to the working at home for these people. Some other work hours that may apply to everyone, just long hours and this lack of transition time. I know myself, I didn't realize how much taking public transportation helped me let go of the office and get my head around coming into home. Or some people may feel some guilt because they fared well during this pandemic, but yet they know of colleagues or family and friends that didn't do as well. Or how do I juggle home life and homeschooling? That is certainly a big source of stress. And then finally, one thing that we do want to bring to your attention, and that is the organizational culture that doesn't recognize that this is a real thing, that we are impacted by the clients that we work with when they are not managing well. When they bring, difficult histories or trauma into the work that we do, with them, and how do we best take care of ourselves, and does our organization recognize that in general? So in terms of that, these factors that we talk about can affect, our competency to be able to do our jobs. And that doesn't mean I'm saying that you're incompetent. It's just that if you're emotionally exhausted, if you're stressed, you're not always at your best thinking well. And we're talking about competency being, your knowledge, your skills, your attitudes, and the values that you bring to your job, to practice effectively according to the standards, that you have. There is a natural decay in general in competency. That's why we do CEUs and CLEs and read in the area to improve our ability to do our job. And these other kinds of things can really take away from it. And think about it, during this last year, what was our barometer, for competency in terms of doing our work if we were feeling stress and distress, at home.
Okay, so what does impaired professional competence look like? So distress unchecked may result in impaired ability to effectively utilize and implement our knowledge, skills, and abilities. I think that speaks to we're human too. And hopefully the pandemic and this heightened awareness about mental health and how important it will take some of that stigma away. May be a gradual process and fall in a continuum, as we saw. The line between distress and impairment may only be seen in the rearview mirror. We're all vulnerable to some form of impairment at some points in our lives and careers. We cannot always perform at the same high or low for our entire careers. It just doesn't happen. And distress and impairment are not distinct. They all fall on a continuum. And so, I think we all question ourselves, or we want to do our best and use, best practices about what we do. And again, not being together and not being able to, see the nuances and have those bonds with our coworkers to the extent that we used to. Some of that, feedback might be missing at this time.
Right. So those are some of the things that we need to be mindful of as we transition back to work. We want to move to the other side of that spectrum and, just take a moment to think about, what were the pluses? What were your advantages? What were your gains from being able to work from home? Maybe some things that would surprise you that you never thought would happen, but just take a moment to think about those things in terms of what went well for you. Feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to see them. Diane?
Okay, so what we have here is a family celebrating Dad's birthday last April 2020. And if you notice, the 3 is big and the 9 is small, so maybe it was whatever they had around the house. I think, or a lot of people think, is that, if we could look also at the touching moments and the creativity will, I think, I know for me, though, still seeing those silver linings has really, been a plus and carried me through. And, it's very touching to see the human spirit can be resilient and can be creative. And sometimes those plan Bs are even more touching. I know I have an April birthday, and last year when we were in the height of the pandemic, my neighbors, one of them's a wonderful cook, made a cheesecake, and they had a Zoom birthday party for me. And I was just so touched, even more than if it was like during regular times and we ate the cheesecake in person. Nancy?
Yeah, I wanted to say, and I saw someone saying in the chat, quality time with their new husband. And one of the things that allowed for me was that I had a much more deeper bond with my adult children that are still living with me. Not that that should surprise me, but we really got to know each other better. That, you know, without this pandemic, I'm not too sure I would have had that opportunity. Not that anybody wanted this pandemic, but since it was here, I was able to, I don't want to say take advantage. It just really unfolded that way. And I feel a lot more closer to my kids. Someone also said about saving money in the commute, and that was another piece too, that you didn't have to put out money every day to come back and forth, whether you were on public transportation or driving. So yeah, there's a lot of things here that could be an advantage, and maybe you might not want to lose moving forward, right? So other things that we had found from working at home and talking with people.
I just have to comment, we did get, out of our questions, it seemed that people had the pluses more, which was, it's refreshing to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people. And thank you for keep the chat questions coming. So working from home, the positives, what we've heard from lawyers and mediators, and I'm sure people can fill in the blanks too, is that what I've heard from attorneys is that online filings and some of the more grunt work and the stuff that they used to hang around court for hours and hours. And I had a few lawyers say to me, and crank up the bill or eat up the retainer can be done online. And they think some of that's going to continue. The ease of not moving from office to court and court to office. So many times I would speak to an attorney and they'd be like, well, I'm in court all day and then I'll go to my office, so I'll talk to you then. And it could be like 7 o'clock at night. More flexibility in scheduling clients, and that trainings and conferences, CLEs, can be done online for mediators as well.
Right. And for some of the mental health professionals, there's more flexibility in scheduling clients. So you have that, to do if you're renting office space, especially if you're renting from some other person, you have a specific time that you see clients. And then, some of your clients don't necessarily need childcare. So maybe there's less cancellations of appointments, or, just more flexibility for them to be able to come. And if you have more than one type of thing that you do, ease of moving between other work commitments and jobs, so you don't have to be necessarily in physical locations. And then, of course, training and conferences, CEUs can be done, online as well. So these were just some, and you guys listed a whole bunch more in the chat, which is great, and I love the one that talked about sharing our humanity. Right, to be able to do that by being able to speak to people all around the world. That's really something that may not have happened under other circumstances.
So enhanced professional competence. So it kind of comes full circle. So we're taking better care of ourselves, but it's sort of like a paradox, because we're in a pandemic and we have the time. But for those of us who, I guess, were lucky, or who saw it in a way for an opportunity for growth, might have a sense of peace that they're not running around. They don't leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning and come back at 8 o'clock at night, and might see that you can't beat the commute now. Right, and we have somebody, no geographical restrictions in handling mediations across the state. Yes, so you could service more people. You could service people in rural areas, people who don't have cars, and there's the list is endless. Projects you completed due to more available time. A lot of us have that project that's sort of hanging over our head that we don't get to. Maybe you're able to sleep more appropriately because you're not getting up earlier to commute. Time for better self-care. Got to work online from out of town. Sort out work and priorities. Maybe start to think about or have done some reconfiguration of your work life, not frustrated with travel delays and crowds, eating better, less takeout, more home cooking. And maybe we realize that we need less money And so we could work less. I know when I was in lockdown here in New York last April and May, I saw a whole spring wardrobe go right by. And I know I shopped too much. And I said, it's not even worth it. It's not, I can do with less, and I can do with less money. And you know, and I thought of things a lot differently. And but with all this said, sometimes we might even have survivor guilt. I mean, there was so much that happened around us, and maybe your family wasn't so lucky, but you might also be questioning, why was I so lucky? And I haven't felt this peaceful in years. And I want to go back to work, but how? And I don't want to lose this, my centeredness by going back to work, but I also want to be with other people. So it's sort of like, I don't know, it could almost be a conundrum as we think about how we might configure going back to work. So crisis is opportunity to do something different. Okay, so it helped us to all focus on racial injustice. Absolutely, absolutely. And that people had time to go to the Black Lives Matter movement. And that was, and to follow what was happening on TV and in the media. Absolutely. So and hopefully that will continue and sustain. So crisis is the opportunity to do something different.
Right. So, given, before the pandemic, how things were working, and then during the pandemic, what you might have learned about what didn't work so well and what did work so well, that those are things that hopefully you can consider in terms of how you want to reconfigure and move forward. And we also thought about these things that you want to, think about, the CDC, New York State, New York City guidelines, which seem to be changing on a daily basis. For anybody who's been going into the office, maybe even part-time or sometime, and what is your comfort level with being able to wear masks? And clients that you see, what are you going to be asking from them? And vaccinations, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about clients who aren't vaccinated? Maybe you are not vaccinated, whatever that might mean. These are things that you want to think about in terms of how you're going to come back, and other work factors that you may want to change. And maybe, if you can, I don't know what you may have control over in terms of the work that you do, but what makes sense to you in terms of going back, given the pluses that you learned about through this year with the pandemic, and the things that didn't work so well. And consider those things in the home life that you might want to change. I saw in the chat someone talking about, every day having, lunch with their husband, and so, is there a way to somehow do both, or do both sometimes, whatever that might mean for you. Everybody has their own way of thinking about this. And then, of course, there are some unknown variables that we don't know what will happen, particularly as time moves on, because things seem to be happening really fast right now. And hopefully we'll be reaching a herd immunity soon.
Okay, so what we might want to look at, as we've had time to take pause and think, is that we might want to consider that your passion is not only from your work. And if you have found other passion, how do you now, incorporate that into work? So this picture kind of just depicts that you can have your cake and eat it too, or you can try to have your cake and eat it too, but you probably get the picture. That, how do we take this, with us? Can we have more of a work-life balance?
Right. And some other things that we want to, talk about, is the idea of self-care, and self-care as an ethical imperative. I think that, our American society, just in general, just demands that we, work and work more and do more, and so forth and so on. And that really isn't good for us overall. And so we're hoping that you think of self-care as differently if you're not already, that it is something that needs to be done to be able to work at our best and as a way also to psychological wellness. And you are your only tool. So for you to have self-awareness of when you're feeling distressed, to reflect on things that work well for you, that don't work well for you, to be able to figure out what to do moving forward, and that you are attending to all of you, whether that's physical, whether that has to do with, exercise, sleep, whatever that might mean, relational, what are your connections with the people in your life, spiritual, maybe that has to do with, God and church, or perhaps it has to do with nature. All of these things are things that you want to address and think about how you can bring them into your life if you don't already do that when you transition back to work. And Diane talked about this a little bit earlier, which is that, when we're in work, to watch out for our colleagues as well. When people are being affected by their work, whether it's vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, or distress, whatever it might be, sometimes you're not even aware of it and that it's affecting you. And so if you see someone that you feel is, working differently or not themselves, to bring it up to them, because we have our blind spots as well, and then again, create, maintain positive career sustaining behaviors, whatever that means for you, as well as being aware of maladaptive coping skills that Diane talked about, before.
Okay, so what is post-traumatic growth? We hear about post-traumatic stress, but what's post-traumatic growth? So people who endure psychological struggle following adversity can often see positive growth afterward. And people who get support, people who have a spiritual base, people who have a network might fare better. And then then there is a theory that explains the transformation following trauma. You know, and also people get the skills. If people came out of the pandemic with seeing the silver lining, they could hopefully carry those skills and that thinking into other areas of their lives. So people develop new understandings of themselves, the world they live in, how to relate to other people, the kind of future they might have, which is key for what we're talking about today, and a better understanding about how to live life. So, so we might really use this opportunity for, growth and post-traumatic growth in our own lives. And I believe that a lot of times the person who has achieved post-traumatic growth can really be an example to others.
Yes, Diane, and I just want to put out there, I don't know how it was for someone, but this pandemic first happened, I had a lot of anxiety and fear. And as time went on, I was aware of that I was experiencing trauma. And part of that was because I didn't feel that the government was protecting us in the way that I felt I needed to be protected. And I was very scared of getting the virus, thinking that the worst would happen if I did. And so that was a very difficult time for me, in trying to, get through that. But in reflecting and understanding more about what was underneath all of that for me, I made a connection with my own, history, my own childhood, that was very enlightening to me. As much as it was real, I did transform and really grew in that area. It didn't take away that there was still a real fear, but it helped to reduce some of my anxiety once I figured that all out. So I just wanted to share that with the group. I know everybody dealt with this differently and its impact was different, but I know that was for me. So, what is FamilyKind doing for that?
So okay, so FamilyKind And as we just saw, that Leslie Friedland put in the, our executive director put in the chat, is that she appreciates how it's, it is an ethical imperative to have the staff secondary trauma needs met. So to that end, Leslie was supportive and organized, and helped us to organize, and asked Nancy and I to do an in-person presentation, like we said, right before the pandemic, on secondary trauma anyway, and supported and comes to every single meeting of our group, right? And again, we meet once a month. Actually, we're meeting this evening. So we have that, and the research says that when the organization recognizes that there is secondary trauma, that's a real issue, and that you need that staff should not feel stigmatized by acknowledging that, and that staff actually is more competent when that is addressed. That the staff does fare better. So, certainly at FamilyKind, secondary trauma gets a nod. And then also, of course, moving into primary trauma since the pandemic. A training I did go to, and I would think that this is probably starting to be strong conversations in other professions too, but in the social work profession, we have everybody's, ethical code. So our code of ethics, there's serious conversation, if it hasn't happened already, that self-care is going to be in our code of ethics.
Right. And as Diane was saying that our trauma group, it does meet once a month. Right now it's meeting on the third Monday of each month. It meets for an hour and a half. And it can be very helpful, even if you don't think that you've experienced some kind of secondary trauma, but to be able to express some stress and distress that you may be having at work, and not to feel so isolated with it, because those are key things to being able to be more resilient when the work is very difficult. We use an online Zoom platform. It's a warm, inclusive, and safe group. We support each other. And the opportunity to receive support and feedback from your colleagues. We also do some self-care exercises, and generally there is a mindfulness exercise that we do as a part of this group. So that's what FamilyKind has been doing to be able to help address this for really what our frontline work is when you work with clients who may have experienced trauma or have difficult, histories. So this might be a good time to do the poll, Diane, unless you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so we are going to do a poll. You'll see this. Are you interested? Is anyone in the audience interested in considering and hopefully committing to a 90-minute secondary trauma group once a month? We are in the conversation stage of putting it out to folks who are not in-house at FamilyKind. So it'd be really important just to see, where you feel that you're at with it today.
Hey guys,
So
thank you.
like we ended with about a 50-50 split there.
Okay, well, that's great. It's good to good to know. Thank you guys for voting. I understand that we'll be able to be in contact with those that may be interested. So
yeah, I just want to say that's very helpful. That's very helpful. I'm sorry, Nancy, because we particularly since we're working like in isolation, like to just know what's outside of FamilyKind and what the needs are and what people might be thinking about. I'm sorry, is really helpful.
No, that's fine, Diane. Thank you. So what we wanted to do with you, since we do a mindfulness exercise as part of the group, we just wanted to do a 5-minute mindfulness meditation with you. So I hope that you will participate with me. So I'm just going to ask you to, put things down, and, we'll just kind of breathe together. And, when you're ready, just, close your eyes, and just notice the flow of your breath. Notice as it comes in and as it goes out. Focus on your breathing. And you might even want to put, your hand on your belly to notice how your belly rises and falls with your breath. You don't have to do anything different about the way you breathe. Just allow yourself to breathe as you are right now. Breathe in and breathe out. Notice as the breath flows in and flows out. And if you find yourself wandering from your focus on your breath, that's okay. Just note what arose instead and let it go. And then just come back to your breath as it comes in and as it goes out. Just breathe as your body wants to breathe. That's all. Don't change anything at all. Going to do a short loving kindness meditation with you. So I want you to let go of your breath right now and put your attention in your mind's eye on someone you care about very dearly, whoever that person may be. And just get a picture of them in your mind. And just see the expression on their face. And then say to them in your mind's eye, may you be healthy. May you be happy. May you have peace and ease. And now, in your mind's eye, get a picture of someone who challenges you, who maybe you don't get along with very well, whoever that person may be. And just look at their face and see what their expression is on their face. And say to them, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May you have peace and ease. And in your mind's eye, now get a picture of people that you care about. Include the people that are on this webinar with us. And then expand it to include people that are in New York City. Expand it again to include all the people in New York State. Make room for all the people in the United States. Include also all the people in North America, in South America, in Europe, Asia, Africa, all over the world. Make room for them and say to them, May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you have peace and ease. And just take a moment to check in with the state of your body right now. And notice your breathing. And just take 3 deep breaths. Breathe in, out. Breathe in and breathe out. And on the last breath, breathe in joy and breathe out tension. And we'll end this mindfulness moment. We'll give you a moment to come back, take your time, open and close your eyes as you need to. So welcome back, folks. We have a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions for us, we'll be happy to answer them if that is the case.
Looks like we currently do not have questions. We do ask that people put those in the Q&A function. If you would like to have a question answered, we do still have about 10 minutes here. Looks like we did get a question here. What do you recommend we say to a colleague we see experiencing secondary trauma?
So I would just start, with, how are you doing? And maybe even what you've observed if you think that they may have experienced something like, I know that that was a really difficult client. How was that? How are you doing with that? I would start there and see, where they're at, because just talking about things with a colleague can be really very helpful depending upon, how it impacted, and whether it's a series of impacts over time, or is it just this one particular time that has caused me a lot of distress.
Mhm.
Diane, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think too that the stigma piece, we're in the helping professions, and we're this isn't supposed to happen to us. And I think just kind of giving the person the emotional permission to just say, hey, it's okay. And if in your conversation you can, of course, be supportive, but also let them know, you can go further with taking care of yourself, and maybe just doing an education piece, or if you knew of any, resources. My prediction, and we see this, is that there's a lot of resources cropping up now. So I'm just really hoping that the stigma gets taken away, because I really think that's a huge barrier to why we don't, maybe even admit it. When I went to social work school back in the day, there was no mention of secondary trauma in our textbooks. And now that I teach social work, it's in every textbook, at least somewhere. And it was growing even before the pandemic.
If I could just add on to that, Diane, I was thinking about that because, distress and more can impact our ability to do our job, which is our financial, a way of earning, a living, that can be a really kind of a difficult thing. It can set people up. And that's where organizational culture can be really helpful, to be able to do interventions before it gets, too far along. It's, I'm not saying that it's a snap once we know this is what we have, we do A, B, and C, and everything is fine again. But it's not even seen that way. And so I would imagine a lot of people don't want to say, I'm being affected at work, or I'm being affected and I'm not doing my job as well, whatever that might mean. So yeah, so it has to be, that's why it's an ethical imperative for everyone. So yeah, I agree.
Right. Because a person might just freeze and just think that they have no options and no out, because they just have to continue to work. And they like their profession, they're not going to go back, or their profession, they're not going to go back to school. That wasn't their plan, but they do need to take care of themselves. But how? How do they do that?
All right, I see we did receive a couple more questions here. Looks like we have time for two. So one of these is, can secondary trauma come from sources other than your work?
So I think the answer is yes, but I do know that the DSM doesn't handle it that way. They talk about trauma that comes from work, but I know that I could talk with people that have experienced trauma, and as I'm listening to them, and this has nothing to do with my work, in terms of what they've all gone through, can impact me. So I'm only saying this as an opinion. I don't know this to be true. I just know my own experience in life, that has definitely happened to me. Diane, do you have a different opinion, or?
I think that everybody has suffered from some kind of secondary trauma, if not primary trauma. But I think that maybe the difference here, that what we're trying to capture, is that in our work, we're at risk for it. And this could happen for years. This is kind of like, almost expected. So there might be there might be commonalities, and maybe even some of the physiological responses are the same. But I think too, there's another layer on this when it has to do with work. And also, like you said, Nancy, what's the organizational culture around addressing that? Is it okay to be out there with it?
So our final question here today that I'm seeing is, do you ever suggest any regular post-session, non-judgmental reflective practice among peers? This would be for mediators, psychotherapists, social workers. This person says the mediators often do this.
You want to take that one, Diane? I have an opinion. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like it's the bigger umbrella would be debriefing, and always I would always recommend debriefing. I think a good supervisor at a job debriefs. I mean, I'll share with you, I'm sure I suffered secondary trauma when I worked in foster care in Brooklyn for 10 years. But I think that one of the reasons why I did last for 10 years is that we had a wonderful director who would not only teach us, give us the skills to be able to deal with and address the issues at the job, but she did a lot of debriefing. So if that could be, maybe different professions might call it different things. I mean, I think every profession, particularly if you if you're at high risk for secondary trauma, that should be built in. And that's a very good point too. Maybe not, in addition to a secondary trauma group, that there's regular debriefings.
I agree. Just to add that I think self-reflection is not only a wonderful tool for growth, but it's actually a therapeutic tool. So, to have not only self-reflection, but reflection with peers, I think is, a great way to go. If you can be a part of a group, that would be terrific. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much for answering those questions and for your excellent presentation today. There was so much useful information, and I'm sure that everyone got a lot out of it. I know that I did personally. I also want to thank all of our attendees for being here today. We hope that you can join us for the next peer-to-peer session, which will be on June 21st, again from 1 to 2 p.m. And the topic of family science skills matter, understanding and using lessons learned. On that day, we will hear from Gerald Cannon and Ellen Tanner. We hope to see you all there. Thanks again to all of our sponsors for making this possible, SoberLink and Our Family Wizard. I hope that everyone here has a wonderful evening and enjoys the rest of their week.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.